They say moments of truth reveal who we really are. Imagine walking toward the courthouse, robes in hand, ready to deliver justice, when suddenly, you're stopped by flashing lights and a voice of authority that doesn't see who you really are. That's exactly what happened when Judge Harris, a respected man in his community, was confronted by an officer who thought power meant control. The judge remained calm, but the air grew tense. The officer didn't ask questions, he gave orders. A man who had spent his life upholding the law was now treated as if he had broken it. Onlookers froze, unsure whether to speak up. And while Harris could have revealed his title immediately, he chose patience, watching to see how far this officer's assumptions would go. In that silence, the story began, not just of a stop, but of a lesson the whole city would soon never forget. The officer's tone grew sharp, almost dismissive, as he questioned why Harris was walking near the courthouse entrance. Harris explained calmly that he had a session to begin, but his words were brushed aside. "ID, now," the officer demanded. People passing by slowed their steps, sensing something was wrong. The judge's eyes carried both disappointment and strength. He had seen injustice from the bench countless times, but never imagined he'd stand on the receiving end in front of the very courthouse where he had defended fairness. For a moment, Harris thought about ending the humiliation with one sentence: "I am the judge you're supposed to respect." But he stayed quiet, allowing the officer's actions to reveal themselves. Every second deepened the tension. And in that fragile moment, a story of arrogance and dignity was unfolding, one heartbeat at a time. The courthouse staff inside began to notice the unusual delay. One clerk hurried outside and recognized Judge Harris immediately. Her voice trembled as she said, "Sir, is everything all right?" The officer cut her off, insisting that he was handling the situation. But Harris's silence spoke louder than words. He was waiting, not for sympathy, but for truth. The officer, unaware of the audience forming around him, continued his stern commands, assuming he was teaching a lesson. But it was he who was being tested, exposed under the weight of his own authority. Harris looked around, watching how people reacted. Some whispered, some shook their heads. A lesson was being written in real time, not in law books, but in human hearts. And just when the tension felt unbearable, Harris finally reached for his briefcase. Inside lay not just papers, but the revelation that would shift everything. The officer leaned closer as Harris opened the briefcase. He expected resistance, maybe defiance. But instead, Harris pulled out a neatly folded black robe. In that moment, silence fell. The robe wasn't just fabric, it was a symbol of justice, of authority, of honor earned over decades. Slowly, Harris draped it over his arm and spoke with measured calm, "I'm here to preside over today's cases. And you, officer, are late to your own courtroom lesson." The crowd gasped. The officer's face paled as realization struck. He hadn't stopped just a man, he had stopped the judge who oversaw the very laws he claimed to protect. The weight of his mistake pressed down like a storm. But Harris didn't gloat, didn't lash out. Instead, he gave the officer the chance to understand the mirror held up before him. This was no ordinary encounter, it was a turning point. The officer leaned closer as Harris opened the briefcase. He expected resistance, maybe defiance. But instead, Harris pulled out a neatly folded black robe. In that moment, silence fell. The robe wasn't just fabric, it was a symbol of justice, of authority, of honor earned over decades. Slowly, Harris draped it over his arm and spoke with measured calm, "I'm here to preside over today's cases. And you, officer, are late to your own courtroom lesson." The crowd gasped. The officer's face paled as realization struck. He hadn't stopped just a man, he had stopped the judge who oversaw the very laws he claimed to protect. The weight of his mistake pressed down like a storm. But Harris didn't gloat, didn't lash out. Instead, he gave the officer the chance to understand the mirror held up before him. This was no ordinary encounter, it was a turning point. Inside the courthouse, the scene spread quickly. Lawyers, clerks, and even citizens awaiting their hearings whispered about what had just unfolded outside. Harris walked into the courtroom, robe flowing with quiet dignity, the officer trailing behind like a shadow. People stared, realizing they had witnessed something historic, not a clash of titles, but a clash of values. When Harris took his seat on the bench, his gavel struck not just for order, but for clarity. He reminded everyone in attendance that justice begins with how we treat each other, not with the papers we file. The officer stood silently in the back, feeling every word cut deeper than any reprimand could. The room wasn't just a courtroom anymore, it was a classroom, and Harris had just delivered a lesson that no one present would ever forget. By the end of the day, whispers of the incident had spread far beyond the courthouse walls. Some saw it as humiliation for the officer, others as triumph for the judge. But Harris never called it either. To him, it was an opportunity, a reminder that respect must go deeper than appearances. Later that evening, the officer approached him privately, still heavy with shame. Harris placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Change begins with moments like these. Don't let this mistake define you, let it shape you." Those words stayed with the officer long after. And for the city, the story lived on as proof that dignity, patience, and truth hold more power than a badge or a robe alone. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable moments aren't the ones that shock us, they're the ones that teach us what justice truly means.